Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. Today is going to be a really exciting program, and I can't wait to introduce our guests. But you're going to have to wait just a moment because we're always getting new listeners. And so I like to tell you a little about ourselves at Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm Lori LeBay, the host and founder, and I was a daughter to a mother who had dementia for 30 years, and that's why we started down this path, was to try to raise everyone's voice and help connect people to different resources, products, and tools that they need so desperately. And so it's my honor to do this job. We, bottom line, are an advocacy-based company that provide multiple platforms. So not just the radio show, but the blog or resource directory. We have YouTube. We do a thing called Dementia Chats where I interview people who are the true experts, those diagnosed with the disease, and ask them what would they like life to be like? How could we better communicate with them? How can we better provide for them? We also work with companies to expand their brand footprint by leveraging our content platform. So again, they can get their information out into the world. And I would be amiss if I wouldn't say thanks to all of you as our audience members. You see, your likes, your clicks, your shares have mattered so much. And I know you don't think it's a big deal because it just takes seconds, but you are having a huge impact by pushing out the content we provide to your audiences, to your friends, your family, your colleagues. You are making a huge difference because there are so many people out there that need the information but might not be ready to grab it yet. But the more we can make it feel comfortable and normal that this information is even there to grab, they'll get it the more often that they see it. So thank you so much for all of your work. And think about maybe being a guest on our show. We'd love to have you. Again, we interview people who have dementia, families and friends who are caring for loved ones, business professionals. We have movie directors. We've had researchers, singers, songwriters, advocates of all ages and stages of life. So, feel free to reach out to me. Just go to alzheimerspeaks.com. and click on the big contact buttons. Now, I also like to always do a shout out to a few companies that I just adore. And so I want to bring your attention to the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation. They are holistically based. So if you're really interested in what can you do to maybe prevent or stall off any type of dementia, you will find information on diet and exercise. And we've got a great meditation program and training program. So just go to alzheimersprevention.org. The other company that I want to give a shout out to is Calendar Cards. I love them dearly. They are a memory system that they created that helps people manage their lives so that they can be more independent and feel freer in terms of daily activities. But they also have a memory cafe directory, and we're pushing 500 cafes now in the U.S., which is just absolutely incredible. You can access that by going to memorycafedirectory.com. And then for those of you who are familiar with Dementia Raw, or maybe you are just familiar with Kathy Braxton and Tammy Newman with the Silver Dawn Training Institute, they're actually coming to Minnesota in August. I think they're going to be here the 6th and 7th in White Bear Lake for their Certified Dementia Communications Specialist training. And I'm actually going to attend that. These guys are marvelous. They do a lot with what they call introspective improv, and they are just a hoot and a half. You will learn a lot that you'll be able to apply in all of your life. And you can go to cdcsdementiaraw.com to find out more about them. And the very last thing that I have to do, which I was going to do first and I forgot, it was I have to give a shout out to all my pals in Pennsylvania. I was just in Lehigh Valley's Alzheimer's Caregiver Retreat, and it was absolutely fabulous. I got to meet Kim Campbell, who is Glenn Campbell's wife. She did the keynote in the morning. I did the the one in the afternoon, and the team out there was just absolutely incredible. The audience was fabulous, and I think we all learned so much from one another. So I just want to thank them for having me out, and appreciate all that they are doing to make the world a little bit more dementia friendly. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest today, James Falvey, and he has been leading Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly since 2015, with a vision of building a community-wide movement to end isolation and loneliness among older adults here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And I am just so excited to have him on the show today. He has a degree in management from Concordia University here in St. Paul and well-rounded leadership experience with such organizations as private universities, numerous environmental organizations, and the United Way. He serves on the board of the Minnesota Leadership Council on Aging and is a member of the Citizens League Task Force exploring supportive decision-making for independent older adults who lack family support, which so often are forgotten in our system. And James lives right here in Dellwood, Minnesota with his wife of 17 years, Kirsten, and their 2 children. And he enjoys hiking and occasional home improvement projects. Those can kind of go either way, I know, James. How are you doing today? Welcome.
I'm doing really well, Lori. Thanks so much for having me with you today.
Well, I'm very excited to have you here, and I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know your company does as much as it does, your organization. So I can't wait to learn more myself and raise awareness for others, not only here in Minnesota, but around the world, because you're an expansive organization. But before I start with our line of questions, I always like to just ask so that our listenership has an idea. Have you been personally touched by dementia with family or friends at all?
Yes, I have. You know, my late father, Bill Falvey, he had Parkinson's disease, and at the end stages of that progression, he started experiencing dementia quite frequently. It was quite a profound change in his life and in the life of the rest of us around him.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. It's, I always tell people it doesn't make any difference if you've been touched or not. It's just nice to know. Most of us are going to be touched at some point in our life if we want to admit it or not.
Sure.
So the first thing I want to ask you about is the mission of Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly. You talk about wanting to relieve the isolation and loneliness among older persons, which is great, but why is reaching out to that population so important? And what are the risks that we see about being lonely and socially isolated? Is there statistics and research to back that up?
Yes, thanks for asking that question. It's really, really important. Our organization started here in the Twin Cities back in 1972, but our founding happened in France in 1946. Our organization is still known as Little Brothers of the Poor, and it happens to be the 4th largest charity in that country. And sometimes I can say that we're the 4th smallest charity in this country, which is probably not exactly true, but it's generally true in that we're quite small in comparison to the organization back there. And when we've been doing this work to try to address social isolation for all these years, for almost the entirety of our organization, our work has been considered really nice, but not important. So when you look at large foundations and government agencies, they've never really wanted to fund this kind of work because they felt like feeding people and providing access to health care would be far more important, and that this would be, nice, but not, like I say, not important. But science is starting to come around to help us understand that the social determinants of our wellness become much more powerful than medical interventions. The science is leading us to believe now that we might have a better, more well-rounded, healthy life if we lived on an island without medical care, but with family and friends around us who loved us and supported us, versus living right next door to a wonderful medical facility and unfettered access to the technology, but without the friends and family support. And that's really profound when you think that our our system of delivering services is really medical based, and so 80% of funding goes into medical care. But what's really important to realize is that the things that we have in our lives are what really support our health the most. And so diet has been known for a long time, exercise has been known for a long time, but now science is telling us that in addition to having a wellness plan that includes diet and exercise, we need to all have wellness plans that include our social connections, because all of us are exposed to a decline in our social connections as we age. You can do everything right. You can have the most loving, supportive spouse and a big, huge family around you, but there's no guarantee that as you get into older stages of life, whether or not your spouse will be around, your family members will be around.
I loved so much of what you said there. Basically, that it's nice, but not viewed as a necessity. How isolated all generations are now getting, and the impact of that. The mental health status is really getting attention. And the importance, I know with dementia itself, for so long they weren't looking at the psychosocial effect of this disease or the benefits of those interactions. And they are finally now dipping their toe into that and going, this might really help. And, I'm involved with the memory cafes and a lot of different social movements, and it's life-changing. I mean, people with dementia tell me that all the time. And I so agree with, we need to keep those connections. We've gotten so computerized and so connected to our phones, and we're sending emojis instead of reading one another's nonverbals or touching somebody, just giving them a hug. And all of those things are huge. We're missing the tone of voice and, the inflection and the meaning behind things. And I think we're getting really lost as a society, and it's sad. It's almost becoming, we're distinct with our ability to have true raw relationship. And yet I'm sure you see this all the time. I know I did, just even in real estate. I would have problems with people not wanting to move out of their family home because it was pride, it was independence. And, I had to teach people that people always move for the same kind of categorical reasons. But the stages of life change, but it's always about independence. It's always in that connection and feeling purposeful. I know a lot of times after they would move out of their house where they were totally isolated and they would move into a community, a lot of times myself and their family couldn't even track them down because they turned into these social butterflies. And people were shocked at the change in behavior and attitude.
Yeah, it's really, really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. What do you see as some of the solutions to social isolation and loneliness among our elderly population?
Well, the beauty is the solution doesn't require, science to invent something new. The anecdote is just basic social engagement. The challenge really then becomes, how do you bring social engagement back into the lives of people who have become separated from the rest of the community? And we notice that sometimes the older adults that we serve, they're isolated for a reason. Family circumstances, mental health circumstances, any number of reasons. And we also notice that when people experience social isolation long enough, there's a deterioration in their social skills, which sometimes are then connected to depression and anxiety. And so we have elder friends that we serve who it'll take weeks, if not months, to rebuild those social connections. We have this one elder that we've been serving who's been coming to social events that we put on for years, and she was assigned a new volunteer to be her primary source of engagement. That volunteer agreed to visit with her a minimum of twice a month. He called the office, and it was 7 months that she had been working with this wonderful woman, and she finally got a hug.
Wow.
That kind of victory, when I talk about it, it doesn't have this necessarily the same meaning, but to hear the elation in our volunteer's voice that she had achieved this wonderful milestone in this relationship and knew that she was having such a profound impact on this person's life. And what's just really wonderful is that volunteer is just radiating. I mean, she was so happy and ecstatic to share that wonderful news that you can see that these social relationships, it's not a one-way street. Yes, we may have some older adults who have become socially isolated isolated in an extreme manner, but the value of re-engaging with that person is profound and powerful for both parties involved.
I would imagine for some there's a distrust in
Yep.
terms of, or they've been hurt before, and you have to go through those, those walls and those layers to build that. And then when you get there, it's just even more powerful and more beautiful, like you said.
Yep, absolutely.
Very cool. And I love too what you talked about with the volunteer and how that empowered her and gifted her to be part of that process. So it really is about being relationship based instead of, I think so often we're in a corrective care model. This is right, this is wrong, and we're going to tell you what to do. And now, can you tell us a little bit more about Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly? What programs and services do you specifically, have to address this elder isolation that we're seeing so much of?
Yeah, the main thing that we do is it's really simple and elegant. We pair volunteers that we train and vet with elders that are based on shared interests and shared geography to be in long-term relationships. We call it our companionship program, or sometimes refer to it as visiting and advocacy, because the purpose then is to train our volunteers to become that reliable friend in the life of the older adult, but also then be the eyes and ears, much like you would be as a child to an aging parent. You're not necessarily an expert in healthcare, you're not an expert in social work, but you've got 2 eyes and 2 ears, and you can see and observe what's going on. And then it's our organization is then in a place to work with that volunteer or take over when necessary, when there's advocacy is required. So if that older adult isn't getting the nutritional support they need, we can reach out to the social workers that might be assigned to that person, or other agencies that can come in and help. So we don't try to do everything. We try to focus really deliberately on being a friend to these older adults, and to be that unjudging friend that's there for support and social connection, and let them maintain their autonomy of decision making for as long as humanly possible, and that independent life. Lori, this is becoming really, really important, because as the baby boomer age demographic is coming into old age, we have this vision and this conversation that we talk about. We want everyone to be able to age in place. Everybody has responded to the survey saying, I would much rather live and die in my own home than to be put into an institution, where oftentimes we have a preconceived notion of what that institutional life might be like. And that's all really well and good if we have the social support around us to make that possible. As soon as you don't have a person to speak your name out loud, to ask you questions that are relative and important to you in your life, as soon as you can't get into a car and drive yourself to other locations where other people are, you can find yourself really living in solitary confinement. And if we think about it, we've heard those anecdotal stories about the Russian orphanages where they tried to institutionalize young babies without, giving them the mechanics of life, but not the emotional support. And we hear horror stories about how profoundly affected those people can be. And we hear the United Nations talk about solitary confinement being a form of torture. And we have to continue to try to solve the challenges faced with a large group of people getting into the older age demographic, full dignity in mind, to try to engage our neighbors. Because again, all of us are subject to becoming socially isolated as we age. So it's in all of our best interest to stay engaged with our neighbors in a way that keeps those connections open.
I think so often we're in a corrective care model. This is right, this is wrong, and we're going to tell you what to do, and just follow the dots. And, you're really getting to know the people.
Yeah.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly? What programs and services do you specifically have to address this elder isolation that we're seeing so much of?
Yeah, the main thing that we do is it's really simple and elegant. We pair volunteers that we train and vet with elders that are based on shared interests and shared geography to be in long-term relationships. We call it our companionship program, or sometimes refer to it as visiting and advocacy, because the purpose then is to train our volunteers to become that reliable friend in the life of the older adult, but also then be the eyes and ears, much like you would be as a child to an aging parent. You're not necessarily an expert in healthcare, you're not an expert in social social work, but you've got 2 eyes and 2 ears, and you can see and observe what's going on. And then it's our organization is then in a place to work with that volunteer or take over when necessary, when there's advocacy is required. So if that older adult isn't getting the nutritional support they need, we can reach out to the social workers that might be assigned to that person, or other agencies that can come in and help. So we don't try to do everything.
I so agree with what you're saying. And yet in being in real estate for 25 years, I heard so often from people, I don't know my neighbors anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's less of that integration of neighborhood support in many, many ways. And so even when I would have someone who wanted to move, a lot of times they were thinking if they moved into a townhome or if they moved into a community, that socialization would automatically be there, and it's not. And I blame it on the garage door opener. We don't meet people at the mailbox. We drive up to it nowadays, and our lifestyles have just changed a lot. We hire more things out to be done than do them ourselves, or, see neighbors cutting grass or whatever it might be so often. And so it's changed, I think, there. And I think there's a fear for many between the generations, not understanding one another. And I think that it's because of the isolation and the me factor that we've separated a little bit more too. And so I would see that is, the need for that is going to be even grander in years to come.
Yeah. Well, I think, if as a community we've been able to allow ourselves to drift apart a little bit and isolate ourselves a little bit, that tells me that we also then have the ability to come back together. And when the need becomes more known, and when the pathways for re-engaging one another become a little bit more promoted and socially acceptable, the part of us that protects the me is the part of us that needs to be out there and engaged with the people around us. Any one of us can talk about the weather and talk about sports and find those early connecting points. And if we put ourselves out there just a little bit, sooner or later you're going to find somebody who has additional shared interests that will allow you to kind of stay connected and stay engaged. It's not like everybody has to be friends with everybody else, but we all have to put ourselves out there just a little bit more, share just a little bit more of ourselves, and then we'll see what wonderful value comes back to us for making that investment. It's like that kind of social energy is like a boomerang. The more you throw it out, the more it comes back to you. And we're going to have to test the water. We're going to have some icebreakers, just like we do when we're at a cocktail party and we don't know anyone. There's ways to break through those inhibitions. And once we do, we almost always find it to be a really wonderful experience.
I love your positive attitude and your passion behind this. It really shows. Now, one of the things you had mentioned was that you train and vet your volunteers. Can you tell people a little bit about that process?
Yeah, thank you. It's really important to us to one of the standards for our organization. We have a motto that goes back to our French roots, and the motto is flowers before bread. And what I take that to mean is that human dignity has to come first. And so when we train, we have an orientation for our volunteers. They come in and they learn about the dynamics of social isolation. They learn about the importance of human dignity and how to engage in relationships. And we also teach them how to have really appropriate boundaries, things like exchange of gifts and the lane that we work to stay in terms of being that supportive friend, but not taking on more than what we should, that our role is going to be really clearly defined so that the relationship can be really, really healthy. And so that sets people up for a really successful relationship. We spend a lot of time after that orientation making sure that the matches come together really well, that if you've expressed an interest in doll collecting and you live in the St. Paul side of the Twin Cities, we're going to find somebody who maybe has a similar interest and lives in a similar region. But after that, not everybody's meant to spend time with everybody else. And so we check in both with our volunteers and separately with our elder friends to make sure that it's off to a good start. And then once it is, allow you to kind of explore that relationship. But we also do then the criminal background checks to make sure we're not placing volunteers into the homes of our older adults who are in many cases vulnerable, and we want to make sure we're doing everything to protect their safety.
I love that flower before bread, because to me what that says is feed the soul first, because the soul is the core, and nourishes our mind, body experience here on earth. And and if you can put that literally that petal, and that presence of beauty and connection between us, it eases the whole rest of the process, and it's just a natural thing that we all need.
Thank you. Yeah. And it gets overlooked when we work in the world of human services. Sometimes it feels to me like the human is being pulled out of human services. And I'd love to, if you'll indulge me in a story. When I first started with Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, one of the things that we've done traditionally, and one of the ways we've established our offices in various communities, is we start with holiday meals where we invite older adults who don't have family to come to a Thanksgiving meal or to a Christmas meal. And my very first Thanksgiving meal, I'm standing in this beautiful banquet hall, and this volunteer's coming up to me saying, "James, I love the Little Brothers meal. I volunteer here to help set up the tables, and I also do it with this other charity that serves a holiday meal. And the difference is so profound. At the other location, I set up the table, I sit back and I watch the people come in, and after 5 or 10 minutes, they're putting food in their pockets and in their purses. A few minutes later, they're escorted out. We reset the tables, and then the next group of people comes in. And at the end of that experience, the people are high-fiving each other that they've served more people for less money in the shortest period of time imaginable, and they knew their funders were going to be thrilled with that. But at Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, it's completely different. We have this banquet hall with place settings and tablecloths and china and silverware, and there's a volunteer sitting next to every single one of our elder friends to engage them socially, while some of them are participating and providing music, while other volunteers are playing music. And this is a gourmet meal. There's one seating, and people sit there as long as they want to enjoy this meal. It's so dignified and it's so elegant. And the only way we could pull that off is because we don't currently accept government funding for that program. We don't take large foundation funding that puts that kind of downward pressure on the costs versus the human dignity. And instead, we have the freedom to make this wonderful rather than efficient. And this volunteer was just so excited to be part of what we were doing because he saw the importance of that human dignity which is left behind. We see it also even with like food delivery, that Meals on Wheels programs. In some communities, they've taken what used to be a daily volunteer bringing a meal day to the same route of people, engaging them socially while providing the nutritional support. And in some communities, they've narrowed that down to what I refer to as TV dinners once a week, taking away all of the social connection and just providing the bare necessities. And that takes us back to closer to what those Russian orphanages were trying to do. They were trying to commoditize human existence into those fewest, smallest little steps to support people, but they completely forgot that humanity is part of the equation. And that's what we're really excited about here at Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, is to be the organization that says, no, flowers before bread. Human dignity needs to come first, because that's what makes us healthy and well. That the World Health Organization talks about the social determinants of health, and they say 10% of our wellness is supported through the medical arts, through hospitals and doctors and medications, and the rest of our wellness comes from things that are around us, our genetics that we were fortunate to be born into, the family and the social situation also we were fortunate to be born into, but then also the choices we make with our diet and our exercise and the social support we have around us. And these are the things that provide meaning in life. It's those other things. Of course we want good hospitals. Of course we want access to the appropriate medications. We don't want to leave that off to the side. But at the same time, we have to remember the bigger picture is humans need more than just those mechanics.
James, I just love your passion, and I can't agree with you more. And you and in your organization just get it. And I see the same thing with dementia. When I went in to start Alzheimer's Speaks, everyone said, well, pick a lane. You got to do one thing, and you have to do it really, really well. And I said, I'm not going to do that. We're living in a broken system, and I don't want to join that. I don't want to be part of that. I want to have real conversations with people. And I don't care if it's perfect, because perfect doesn't exist, and perfect is messy. And it's filled with lies and projections, and I'm okay with an unperfect life or an unperfect relationship, and I don't want to have to be ashamed about that. I want to have honest and authentic conversations, and it sounds like that's what you guys are doing. And I see that every day, and I hear it from people how thankful they are when they can have a real relationship.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned about a non-judgmental one too, because none of us are walking a perfect line, and perfect, perfect's kind of like art. It's in the eyes of the beholder there. And so just learning to accept where each of us are, knowing that there are benefits and downfalls in all of our roles, as humans. That's just part of life. But learning to be a better human, and learning to appreciate the power of one, which I think you've leveraged really, really well with your organization and getting that storytelling going. One thing I do have to mention to you, and your organization might be interested in being part of this. I don't know if you've heard about it, but Michael Lloyd White, he just actually flew back to Australia, but he was here for about 6 weeks, and he just did a soft launch in LA for the World Kindness Organization for the USA. Yeah. Now, it's in other countries, and they've tried for 5 years to get it going here, and it's finally off.
Good.
So, I'm one of the founding members of that, but they're just doing some really neat things, and it's just about telling positive stories and encouraging people to know that it's okay to be kind. There's a lot of benefits to this.
Yep.
And passing the word and the story on, so that we're not always hearing the doom and gloom thing, because you sound like you're doing so much around kindness. Michael even talks about Google businesses that even have the word kindness in their mission statement, and you're going to find very, very little, which which is really interesting in and of itself. How can individuals help connect community members to eliminate isolation, and especially as it affects our elderly population? So if we've got listeners here that want to step in and step up, what can they do?
I think on the first level is, just be present in the relationships and in the lives of the people around you to the degree that that's appropriate. Nobody needs that neighbor that's in their business all the time, but everybody needs a neighbor who will wave and smile and say hello and ask how you're doing, and let that be the energy that kind of goes out around you. So that's, step one is just be the change that we want to see in the world. That's a person much smarter and wiser than me that came up with that quote, of course. But that's, the first step is how are we presenting ourselves and being out there and opening the door for social connections to be made and allowing them to live in the state that they need to be in. So if you've got the grouchy neighbor, that neighbor needs to know you're there and that you care, but that you'll give them their space as they need it. And that friendly neighbor who may be raising too many kids with, just one parent or whatever, where you can be there to help and just lend that helping hand. Those are the things that create a wonderful, that tightens the fabric of our communities and our society, and just be conscious of that. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is then to look for those organizations you can get involved in and help in a more profound way. Nobody gets to the end of life and says, darn it, Lori, if I could go back, I would have really gotten a lot more out of life if I would have bought the BMW 7 Series. The 5 Series was nice, but, that's my one regret. Nobody ever says that. They always say, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I spent more time with my friends. I wish I were a bigger influence on the people around me and in a positive way. And that's what we can do. And it doesn't take a lot, so we can do it in our neighborhoods, but we can also do it by stepping forward and joining in an organization that's doing good work. If that's the area of food shelf and helping out there, if that's the area of soup kitchen, if it's finding your chapter of Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly and joining in there, all of that's good. What it takes is a community coming together to look at the problems and the opportunities around us and addressing them and stop, burying our heads into the screen and isolating ourselves, because there's no satisfaction there. Nobody says, I wish I would have downloaded one more app, at the end of their lives when they're talking about where life satisfaction comes from.
I totally agree with you. I think more of us need to understand and really analyze, how do we consciously care? How are we impacting others? How do we want to be treated? How do we want to be remembered? It's just not that difficult. But I think somehow along the lines in society, everybody thinks everything's so complicated and so hard. And yet it's so basic. It's a basic need that we all have, and there shouldn't be shame in receiving help. And I think one of the things I do when I try to speak to groups is, I talk about even the verbiage that we use, because the verbiage sets our expectations and our outcomes. And
Yep.
so even the word like caregiver says, I'm giving it all away, I'm not getting anything back. And then we wonder why people feel burnt out,
Yep.
And we talk about using care companion or care partner, because that puts us relationship based.
Yep.
And everything isn't controlled by criteria in an agenda. When you get together with your friends, you don't pull out an agenda and go, okay, let's see, what are we going to cover today? You just sit down and be and
Yep.
allow the relationship to unfold.
Yep.
And I think it's almost like an art form lost
Yep.
in some ways in society. Everyone is filling out profiles for this and for that, and how do they want to appear, but no one's really showing up.
Yep.
Just be.
How about just asking that checkout person at the grocery store how she or he is doing?
Yeah.
It's just those simple ways to be present in the world around you that end up adding up to make a big difference.
And mean it, and give them eye contact, and wait for the answer.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many people are surprised when I do that. If it's the server at my local restaurant, or if it's the checkout person at whichever store I'm going to, you ask them how they're doing, and you look them in the eye and ask them some small question relative to what's going on around you. And it's amazing how often they're just like, they almost take a physical step back, that they're so surprised that people will do that. And those are the little things in life that make all the difference.
To make a huge difference in life. And you mentioned earlier that dementia is known for the risk of chronic social isolation and loneliness. What are some ways that you're dealing with people who are facing, a diagnosis of maybe Alzheimer's or Lewy body or other forms of dementia, as well as their loved ones who are caring for them?
For us, it's the same. It's kind of the same approach. It's like we want to be present in the lives of people who lack social engagement, and that's irregardless if they're on the dementia spectrum or not. I mean, there's a certain line that we do have to draw when we're bringing new volunteers into the lives of people, and so it's hard for us, given the work that we do, to go too far down that path. But there are any number of stories, because there's no telling who's going to develop Alzheimer's or dementia or forms of dementia. And so we know that, a huge number of the people we serve are on that continuum. And what we just talk about is being present in their lives, being that caring presence, the person that asks how things are going, helping people focus on what's there and what's not, rather than what's not there or what's lost. And again, it just becomes such a powerful experience for our volunteers and the people we serve to be there. There's a wonderful story where one of our volunteers was assigned to a new elder person, for the first time in his experience, and she was suffering from dementia. And they went out and they had a wonderful day going out exploring some shared interests. And at the end of the day, she said, "This is probably the best day of my whole life." And he was on cloud nine. He had thought that he had hit a home run, a grand slam in the World Series of life. He was on, just so happy, telling friends about it. He goes back and gets together with her again a week later, and they go and have another wonderful outing. And at the very end, she says the same thing. This has probably been the best day of my whole life. And 2 or 3 times later, it totally, is now completely upon him that she was living in the moment and appreciating her moment that he had been given to her. So at first he was on cloud nine, then he was a little bit deflated to think, well, that didn't mean anything, but it didn't mean anything in his context, not her context. And then he came full circle and realized he is giving her these wonderful moments. And just because her brain wasn't necessarily able to string those moments together over the course of weeks and months and years in that situation, that his value in her life was every bit as profound, if not more, than it may have been in another person maybe not suffering from that. And it reminded him to live in the moment as well. And so he talks about this regularly, and it's just a wonderful story, a wonderful example.
Well, how cool is that? I do strongly believe that people with dementia have so much to teach us about being present and enjoying life and really savoring the important things, which, like you said, it's not the car, it's not the house, it's not the job, it's the people and the experiences that we have, and in truly, truly connecting. I know my mom taught me that, and taught me that there were different levels of unconditional love and acceptance that I didn't even know existed. I just thought, well, it's here. I had a kid, now I get it. But it's like, no, it can be almost a religious experience, one that's so spiritual it's hard to even put into words, because it just embeds your heart and makes you feel so comfortable and safe. And that's really what everybody wants, to be in that space where you just feel good.
Yep, and sometimes you have to work to get in that space and have that good feeling, but it makes it all the more valuable, where it's not just necessarily handed to you on a silver platter.
Exactly. Now, James, can you tell me if there's anything else that you'd really like to share, if there's another story, or if there's anything that we've missed in my line of questions here that you want to share with our audience?
Oh, I have the problem where I can talk for hours and hours and hours. So I want to respect your time and the time of your listening audience.
James, one of the questions that probably our audience listeners are wondering is, all right, this sounds great, but how much is it going to cost me?
Yep, that's the beauty of the work that we do. Because we have such wonderful volunteers and such wonderful donors to our organization, we don't and never charge the elders we serve for the services that we provide. It's always been free of charge, and it's our intention to always keep it that way. I think we've covered it really well. I think for me, it's just really important that people understand first that social connectedness is an important component to our overall well-being for all of us, and that all of us have the opportunity and the role to play as making sure that we're getting our social connection needs met, while at the same time meeting those social connection needs for others.
That is fantastic.
Daily lives, but we can also do it by joining organizations that help create a little structure around that where it's needed. And
I have one last question for you. In terms of service, will you, if someone is living with family, can you connect them to, or are you looking at people who specifically are living alone?
We kind of have an intake process where we look in and see what the social support network is around any individual who might be interested in our services or might be referred to us for these services. And so there's no one size fits all. We tend to focus on people ages 65 and older, just because the need is so great and we're trying to narrow it to a certain degree. We try to focus on people who have the least amount of social connections, but every situation is different. There's no way that we could create a one-size-fits-all model for this kind of work and what's going on here. There's so many different variables that we want to consider. And so we encourage everybody who's interested or has a concern or an interest in exploring this to reach out to us. We can be reached at through our website, littlebrothersmn.org. And we're happy to talk to anybody about the work that we do. We're happy to talk to people about helping form a chapter in their own community if that's something that they're interested in doing, or joining us here at one of our existing chapters.
I would assume that people can email you through the website as well.
Absolutely.
And then is there a phone number? Because not everybody is webby.
Yeah. I would warmly welcome anyone to call us right here at our office. We have a main number that's really easy. It's area code 612-721-1400.
Well, James, I can't thank you enough for spending this time. This was just, for me personally, it was a really uplifting, positive conversation with you. And I'm so excited and thrilled about the work that you guys are providing here in the Twin Cities and again around the world. And I'd really encourage our listeners to check out again their organization, Little Brothers of the Elderly. It's they're just doing great work. And maybe you're one who could use some help. And maybe you are one who would just love to step up and step into this space and volunteer. I know that they would love to talk with you. So again, thank you so much for your time with us, James. It was just a very powerful conversation, and your energy is contagious. And not all organizations that I talk to represent themselves at that heart level. And to me, there's just such a big difference in what is done and what can be achieved when that passion is there. So thank you so much for your time.
Lori, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing with this platform. I can't tell you how many people are being helped by your hard work and dedication. So thank you very, very much.
Well, it's all about working together and, having that collaboration and knowing that none of us can meet all the needs. And, the more that we can share what other people are doing, the better off we're all going to be. If people would like to donate to your organization, can that be done through the website as well?
Absolutely. littlebrothersmn.org.
Okay. With that, we're going to call her a wrap. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a brilliant week.